as far as he was concerned, was a sign, perhaps, of a breeding program. That literally, Steve, you have an army of fit extensions maybe now that are under construction as we speak. And I have to tell you, I have great respect for Gary Sturman. The guy is a true biblical scholar.
Well, I agree with him, Tom, and I don't know him like you do. I know him only through his writing, but I got to tell you something. What you just quoted from that's in the newest prophecy in the news, and ladies and gentlemen, everybody buy that, because I've been at this a long time. You and I have been at this. I don't know. We talked about it once on the air, but I've been at this a long time. 36 years dealing with the Nephilim and the sons of God, Genesis 6. And I got to tell you something. I think what Gary wrote is probably the most prescient, succinct, and what it does, it takes everything that you know, I know, what we've written about, and it's wonderfully summed up. Because we have to spend so much of our time, Tom, building an understanding or a framework or a reference, like your new book, okay? Leading people, step by step. But what he does is he absolutely, nails it. And God bless him. He's done a marvelous job.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, he's an old friend of mine. In fact, I republished his book. I republished his book, The Omega Conspiracy. In fact, He called my house the other day and left me a message to call him. I don't even know yet what it was he needed, but he's a former college professor. He's a BBC correspondent, and when he wrote The Omega Conspiracy, this in the 1970s, he chronicled the burgeoning of so-called alien abduction in those years, and he tied it to end times prophecy concerning the return of the Nephilim. And he does believe that documentation by abductees worldwide, the stories of DNA harvesting by aliens, that was actually the question I asked Gary Sturman. Dr. Thomas, like Sturman, he thought, you know what, you start out being somewhat conservative, maybe even denying the facts. But when you're open-minded and you're honest with yourself and the facts, the longer you go into this research, you realize that there is something that is going on here. And the harvesting by so-called aliens reminded IDE of the history of biological misuse by the Watchers, and ultimately led him to conclude that the identity of the Watchers, whoever the alien entities are, that these were somehow connected. In fact, IDE told me personally when I was in California and took him to lunch here last year that the special desire by these unknown agents for human and animal molecular matter would explain why animals have been killed, mutilated, stolen by the aliens in UFO flap areas. Well, once again, last month's article, Gary Sturman did a fantastic article on cattle mutilations. And reckoned it to, the spirit behind the god Baal, who always demanded these cattle mutilations and this harvesting of blood, this harvesting of DNA. Well, what's interesting, if people are listening to the show, is it's not just these Christian scholars who are trying to put this in some end times interpretation. The secular researchers, Dr. Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek, Dr. John Mack, Dr. John Quayle, they all came to the same conclusion that whatever this is, it is identical with biblical demonological phenomenon.
Right, and interesting, Tom, just for something to bring up too, HAARP, the electromagnetic high-frequency active auroral research project in Alaska, there are 72 of those around the world, and each one of those is known to be in a gate, as in Stargate, location. So isn't it interesting that the electromagnetic attenuation is in 72 places? That's really important because there are 72 gates even in antiquity. And isn't it interesting that 72 appears so much in prophecy, yet it would be linked to gates, and it would be linked to not, quote, just the location of the gates, but everybody who even acknowledged the presence of stargates, portals, doorways, ladders, Jacob's ladder, all the stuff that is related to what comes through the gates. And again, the thing is that, isn't it interesting too, that one of the most famous computer companies in the world, and I don't even know if they know the symbolism or the relevance of it, but Gateway Computer, it was through the computer technology that they were able to do what we've been able to do. When I say we, all of the technological advances, humanity, when it all comes down to it, even something as simple as advanced computing is being used to open the gates. Open the gates.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, you mentioned the number 72. We should do a series on that. I was on the phone for about an hour just before I started reading that Gary Stearman article, and then your producer called. I was on the phone with the History Channel. They want me to come down to Washington, D.C. and stand in front of the Washington Monument for a series that they're doing right now, and I'm going to do it in a couple of weeks. But what they're wanting me to explain is, what is the symbolism in Washington, D.C.? Why is this thing laid out like an ancient Egyptian grid? And I'm happy to do it, but Steve, if you go inside the Washington Dome, and you look up at George Washington there in the apotheosis of Washington, lo and behold, at the base of it, you have 72 pentagrams. And I'm going to explain to them the meaning behind those 72 pentagrams from the gnosis of both the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, their belief systems about how they could bind and control. And here again, Steve, it has to do with Apollo. The 72 pentagrams, the magic binding square, the 6x6 binding square, all has to do with the return of Apollyon at the end of time and how they believe that they can bind him, how they believe they can control him. So whether or not, but that there is a connection between the ancient power behind the Watcher narrative, the modern alien abduction activity that was documented by Vallée and others involving biological harvesting from humans and animals, and this is happening around the world now. Records from antiquity tell of a mysterious story, the Watchers, the offspring of the Watchers, and how that at certain times they could return to physical form. And the relationship between the Raphaim that Gary Stearman was talking about, the giant occupants of Canaan. Remember Og, king of Bashan, whose bed was 18 feet long?
Yes,
part of the Raphaim. And the Nephilim becomes important because the Raphaim were associated with, by the ancients with the shades of the dead, including Nephilim and Sheol. And the meaning of the word Raphaim is germane because it carries with it the idea to heal, to be healed, as in a resurrection from the place of the dead, Sheol, Hades. We got 5 minutes or less in this show. The point is...
And in the scriptures says, shall the dead rise to praise thee? That's talking about the dead shall rise. That's not talking about humans. That's talking about the Rephaim. And I think, 8 places in the Old Testament talks about the Rephaim. So we're not just talking about stuff that's taken out of context, putting on our own definitions. Good night. This is, by the way, isn't it interesting, too, 72 virgins? I think the people that are looking for 72 virgins may be looking at the ugliest things in the history of the world, and they're going to be disappointed when they go to meet them.
Yeah, I almost wish we would have introduced this idea of 72 earlier on.
Yeah, we'll do a show on that because it's so critical to understanding 6 dozen. It's also it's really important when you understand the, if you will, the hyper-dimensional attenuation of DNA. We can get into why 72 is critical. It's not a double helix. It's a, we're in the double helix world. These guys are creating the triple helix. You carried a story on Raiders News about that. You know what I'm saying? Inventor is not talking about double helix. They're talking about triple helix, quadruple helix. Guess what? These guys got stuff planned. Today's technology, tomorrow's monsters.
Yeah, well, it also, of course, plays into this high occult magic utilities that are sitting out in the open in Washington, D.C., that are literally meant to bring about the incarnation of these spiritual forces.
So I want to get right into it. Tom Horn was last week or the week before in Washington, D.C., filming for the History Channel, and I think I'll let Tom tell the story. Obviously, it's his story, and then we'll go into 72. So, Tom, before we go into the number 72, the last time you were in D.C., last week or the week before, talk about your experience, because the heaviness there in the spiritual sense is multiplying, is it not?
Oh, it absolutely is, and I'll tell you maybe the full story a little bit later when we get to talking about the number 72, because it ties directly to what was going on there. But Steve, it was amazing. I mean, I've been in Washington before, and frankly, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody that lives there, because I know there's a lot of fine Christian people that live in that area, but I always hate going there, and I always feel like I'm driving in under a spiritual cloud. But Steve, I can't even express to you how much this time was worse than anything I had ever expected or had experienced. I hated it. I mean, I literally wanted to just stop in my tracks, turn around, and head the other direction. I wanted to run for the hills, if you will, because it was such an extraordinary darkness, a shadow, an oppression, a heaviness. And the further into Washington I went, the worse it got. Of course, I was praying. I always pray when I go into Washington, D.C., and I certainly was that day. And went and did the shoot with the History Channel, which I may tell you about a little bit later during this show. Then I got back to my motel, and out of the blue, somebody had sent me an article by Ray Gano over at Prophazine, and it was about these, that 100 set deck of cards, that showed the Twin Towers on fire before it actually happened.
The Illuminati card game.
Yeah. Well, one of the cards, I don't even know what Ray was talking about, but one of the cards showed a picture of the U.S. Capitol building, and the name of the card was Plague of Demons. And it showed all these demons that were settling down upon the U.S. Capitol building and there in the Washington Mall, and it just blew me away. I just couldn't hardly wait to get out of town. It just felt like such an enormous, very powerful satanic presence that I mean, it was substantive, though I stutter to try to describe how it felt, Steve.
Well, let's talk about 72, because, Tom, we're doing hours 5 and 6, and obviously the 72, even and thank God for every bit of research that Sue Bradley and others have done, yourself, myself, and all those who've contributed. But the thing that's interesting is that we're talking about a number that is so significant to the end times, so significant to the occultists, so much emblazoned in symbology, from the number of bricks on the back of the Great Seal to 72 ladder or rungs on Jacob's ladder. Let's talk from your perspective and all that you've done with your book, Apollyon 2012. Why is 72 so important?
All right, and if I can, it'll sound at first like I'm really not tying these two things together. I want to give you just a quick update, if I can, from our first 4 hours.
Sure.
About something that I've been uncovering really at a deeper level in my research, something that I wasn't expecting. I'm working right now on a book called Spiritual Warfare and the Coming Singularity. It kind of goes along with some of what we've been talking about. But in our first 4 hours on this subject, we wound up making the point that human enhancement is viewed by some in military think tanks now as part of the next arms race, right?
Yep.
So following those 4 hours, I decided to go back and review a couple of the government reports on the future and what they were anticipating as far back as 2002. There was this National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Commerce published a government report. It was a commissioned government report called Converging Technologies for Improving Human Performance. Now, I had read this, of course, a few years ago, but with everything we had been talking about, you said some things and some thoughts came back to my mind. I thought, I'm going to go back and read this report again. It's almost 500 pages, so I kind of quick read it. It's got diagrams, bullet points, but what's amazing about it is in 2002, how the U.S. government actually laid out the blueprint for the radical evolution of man and machine. People can go, who want to, on the Internet and look that up, Converging Technologies for Improving Human Performance. They can download it in PDF and they can read it. But what's amazing about it, Steve, and this, again, in a little while we'll tie this to the number 72, when you read the government's vision, they imagined that starting around the year 2012, now isn't that an interesting time frame, that human enhancement would lead to, here are some of the bullet points, the transhuman body being more durable, healthy, energetic, easier to repair, resistant to many kinds of stress, biological threats, aging processes. Here's another bullet point. Brain-machine interfacing, transforming work in factories, controlling automobiles, ensuring military superiority. There's that arms race super soldier aspect again. Here's another bullet point. Factories will start to be organized around increased human-machine integration. So, and I think we're not really too far off their target with what we're seeing right now developing in grim tech, like we talked about in those first 4 hours. Here they were a decade ago imagining that around the year 2012, this would begin to unfold. And that list, of course, goes on. There's 500 pages of it. People can go and download that, read the report. But here's the interesting part. How human augmentation and biological reinvention would begin spreading into the wider culture following 2012. This report details global economic aspects of genetically superior humans beginning to act in genetically superior ways, and as a result of this grim techno-sapien DNA upgrading, the report concludes, quote, the 21st century could end in world peace, universal prosperity, and evolution to a higher level as humanity becomes like a single transcendent nervous system, an interconnected brain based in new core pathways of society, end quote. You would think that was a quote from some New Age psychobabble, but it comes right out of a commissioned government report, and actually a report by two of the largest departments of the United States, the National Science Foundation and the United States Department of Commerce. So going back and reading that really reminded me of where some of this started, and I wanted to recommend to people to get that report, because what it shows, Steve, is that this is not like, we just kind of stumbled into this and we can't help it, and what's being echoed in military halls now is, well, if our enemies get ahead of the game, the Jason's saying that if brain-enhanced modified foes start developing, it's forcing our hand, it's making, but what this report illustrates is that this has been a carefully laid out blueprint that the government has done and has been funding. And okay, so here's where this starts getting interesting. There are also newer reports I'll be sharing with the public soon that support what I'm now documenting, and that is related to these the human enhancement development as it relates to the government's interest in super soldier technology, and what, Steve, to the point, what you and I would think of as receptacles for resurrected spirits of the Nephilim. I bet you, unknown to almost all Americans, is information based around a series of hushed events following the sacking of Admiral John Poindexter. You remember him?
Absolutely.
And you might remember how he served as the director of DARPA Information Awareness Office, but only from 2002 to 2003, only 1 year, and because he was a little too willing to discuss openly some of what was happening, and of course he wanted to monitor all Americans, a bunch of other stuff. He brought a lot of heat on government, and he wound up getting sacked. Well, it was during that series of flaps resulting that circled his firing that the public became interested in the goings-on at DARPA. Because he had been working at DARPA, he brought so much light on DARPA, the public started asking questions. And what I'm discovering now in this paper trail
is that there was discovery, if you will, by some witless members of Congress about DARPA's advanced human enhancement research and how advanced it was, even when this report, Converging Technologies for Improving Human Performance, was written, at illustrating that report in 2002, preparing us for what would be unfolding in the year 2012, really was just an effort, if you will, to start kind of warming up people for what was coming. Well, what happened was the Senate Appropriations Committee came under a lot of heat because of what Poindexter's sacking had brought light to DARPA, and all of a sudden you get these, just low member staffers, if you will, in there digging around, and they started wanting to know, how is money flowing through DARPA? This is our responsibility. How's money flowing through DARPA? What are they using it for? They put these names on these projects, but what is it actually being used for? And what they were shocked to find is that super soldier technology was at least already on the drawing board over a decade ago, maybe also off the drawing board. And in fact, investigative journalist and Professor Joel Guru, he provides a summary of some of what happened next, because he was actually able to go in 2005 and sit down in DARPA as an investigative journalist. I think he was writing for MSNBC at the time, and he was able to get a little bit of information. I want to read you just a couple of things he says, because this is astonishing. He says the staffers went down the list of DARPA's projects, found the ones with titles, listen to this, that sounded frighteningly as though they involved the creation of a master race of superhumans, and zeroed out their budgets from the Defense Appropriations Bill. Now there is, I'm quoting him still, there is scant evidence the staffers knew very much, if anything, about the scope of these projects, and we probably never will know the details, because significant people are determined that the whole affair be forever shrouded in mystery. The levels of secrecy were remarkable, even for DARPA, and they were astounding by the standards of the notoriously leaky Senate. Even insiders said it was hard to get a feel for what the facts really were. It took months of reporting and questioning, poking and prodding, even to get a formal no comment, either from the leadership of the Senate Appropriations Committee or from Anthony J. Tether, the director of DARPA at that time. And I'll give you one more quote from this. Listen. Now, a careful study of DARPA's programs a year later, however, showed little change. Considerable creative budgetary maneuvering ensued. That's code talk for now. They're covering up what they're doing.
Right, and Tom, we need to tell people what DARPA is, define it, because I'm getting emails. What's a DARPA?
DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It is the largest and oldest agency of its kind in the United States government that is given the responsibility of doling out dollars to independent research laboratories. They'll put up challenges or whatever, but much of what happens in DARPA is done in such a way that one contractor doesn't know what the other contractor is doing. They're really building the bits and pieces, if you will, to a larger project scheme that the military, the Navy, the Air Force, whatever different departments of the military have an interest in the development of certain, and DARPA, by the way, is always the edgiest kind. The edgiest kind, like we talked about in one of the first 4 hours of this show, in this year's presidential 2011 proposed budget for DARPA, they have included millions of dollars for literally rewriting the DNA of humans and even creating immortal genes. So,
and that's critical for people to understand, because the whole thing, to keep in perspective, ladies and gentlemen, as Tom shares and I share, and we write about this, tell you about this years in advance, is when they make it public, it's already a done deal. And so when we talk about the Ubermensch, when we talk about Nietzsche's Superman, when you go into the history of the whole eugenics program, we've got eugenics on steroids, and we've got basically the devil's design for the end of humanity and the introduction of something in its place. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, and the thing with Joel Garreau, he was an investigative reporter, but he was doing this research in order to write his best-selling book in 2005, Radical Evolution, The Promise and Peril of Enhancing Our Minds, Our Bodies, and What It Means to Be Human. And through his contacts through MSNBC, he was able to get a sit-down, if you will, with some of the people in DARPA who in 2005 were able to share a little bit of this information. But there's quite a bit more to this that I'll be publishing in my upcoming book. And I know we want to get to I know we want to get to the number 72, which is really very relevant in terms of what transhumanism and where this super soldier or whatever technology is going to. Let me give you this final quote. He says, a careful study of DARPA's program a year later showed little change. Considerable creative budgetary maneuvering ensued. The P's of quite a few programs now reside under new, much better camouflaged shells, end quote. And listen now to what one of the DARPA department heads told him, admitted to, if you will, almost sarcastically, quote, they were saying, okay, this is what the Senate Appropriations Committee was saying to DARPA. They were saying, okay, this is the second strike, do we have to go to 3 strikes? Well, it didn't stop anything. We just got smarter about how we position things, and there are new human enhancement programs in the pipeline now as bold or bolder than the ones that preceded them, end quote. These are direct quotes from members of DARPA responding back to what had happened in 2003 and 4 with the sacking of Admiral John Poindexter, and what cast light by the Senate Appropriations Committee. They went in and actually found these money flowing into the creation. This is a quote of a master race of superhumans. It's the most astonishing thing. Well, Steve, what would be, when later in 2005, DARPA admitted that what we're doing now is even as bold or bolder, we just got smarter about how to hide it and call it by different names. What would be bolder or bolder than a master race of superhumans? Oh, and one final thing, and then I'll go to this number 72. Joel Garreau said that he was told several times not to ask about certain things because they wouldn't even answer him, and he said specifically, they said, don't ask about, quote, time reversal methods in the special focus area at DARPA, end quote. What time reversal methods? What could that possibly mean? Now, it really does sound like our pals at DARPA have for years, Steve, been preparing to open these 72 stargates that you mentioned in the last show.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's critical, because, again, a lot of people don't realize that, and you and I, obviously, because we have a biblical foundation, when you're talking about even Jacob's ladder, when you're talking about the gate of the gods, when you're talking, I'm not talking about the God, but when we're talking about the number 72, and there are 72 ionospheric heaters, when you start to see all the 72s that are out there, Tom, it's a blazing number. You know, everybody is like, I love the number 777 because the 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, 7 vials. That's why, by the way, my email is what it is. But the point being is that it's all through DC. It's like their fingerprint, the Illuminous fingerprint, that they're ready for open the gates. You were the one that opened my eyes, literally, that God hit me with a baseball bat on, that the gates of hell, Jesus said he's going to build his body of believers, his church, the called out ones, and the gates of hell will not prevail. I'd say 99.99% of all preachers never understood what that really meant. You don't get beat up by gates, you get beat up or attacked by what comes through the gates. Now, please go into the 72 gates, because it's even in the news right now, coming out of Oman, and we'll get to that story about the jinn, the cave of the jinn, from which we get the word genie. I mean, these are in the news, or 72 famous analysts, not 71, not 79, but 72 gold analysts. I mean, the number, it's like the Illuminists are flashing their neon signs, and now they're adding lightning bolts, hurricanes, oils. I mean, it's like all 100 cards of the Illuminati card game are being played at this moment. So let's go to number 72.
Yeah, well, the Illuminatus and also the gods behind them seem to be kind of playing. It's almost like they're laughing at the world. They throw this stuff right in the world's face, and of course that's been an Illuminatus, Freemasonic, Rosicrucian, Pythagorean practice for a very long time. That the mystics, they hide these very powerful symbols right out in the open, and almost dare people to understand what it means. 72 is, now, in a minute, we'll talk about what I think is the most important aspect of the 72 gateways and the spirits that are represented by them. But so that people understand, it won't take you very long to do any research to find out how important the number 72 is in terms of mysticism. In the Zohar, of course, one of the most important ancient texts, Jewish mystics, there are 72 spiritual bridges in the world that move spiritual entities from one place to the next. And you mentioned the jinn, the genies. Now, I never read the story. You sent it to me, but what immediately came to my mind, maybe you can even tell us what the story's about, but I do know that in the Quran, it is the Surah 72, where you get most of the prominent treatment of the jinn or the genies, or what you and I would think of as demons. But what was the thing with the cave?
Well, the cave, it's interesting because the cave is in 1001 Arabian Nights, and all of the different stories about the jinn, which are the genies, as you remember, just basically being these captivated supernatural giant guys that could grant you 3 wishes once you release them from their lamp, and basically the open sesame on all of the abracadabra words and the secret, if you will, cryptic statements of the mystics. It was always that the jinn were in caves. Now, this cave in Amman, and I'm going to probably murder the name of it, but it's called the Malis, Majlis, Aljinn cave, and it's in Oman. But what's interesting now, it's been closed, and we have literally military around it. That sounds vaguely familiar, like when we went into